Okay, so porn definitely has a fantasy element. And what people complain about when they complain about porn is that it makes men think that women are constantly horny, insta-ready, and it kind of gives men the fantasy that whatever they do, a woman's going to be completely into. There's a kind of instant coming, instant desire quality to it, and it makes men feel powerful, right? And I think that's great. I think it's important for us to have porn or erotica that can give us a sense of empowerment with our sexuality, because so few things in culture do. Most things are coming at every angle to make us ashamed. We're either ashamed of how we have sex, what we desire, or we're ashamed that we're not having enough sex, that we're not having the right desire, that we're not having enough orgasms, and there's all this in between. And I think that, yes, that's great, but I've noticed, especially with erotica, that there are similar fantasy elements that can be detrimental overall. And what I mean by that is, like I say, porn kind of sells this idea of an instant coming girl to men, and that appeals to their level of frustration and impatience with foreplay in real life, right? Well, with porn, with erotica, it sells the idea that you can have the kind of protective prince guy who has your best interests at heart with a guy who kind of does a little bit of unpredictable, surprising push-pull. So you can have the push-pull guy and the protective, stable, predictable guy. You can have the sense of safety and danger. And why is that detrimental? I think that sells women the fantasy of being able to rationalize emotional abuse, because they are seeing it through the lens of thinking that in their subconscious they have all these stories in their head, and these stories have created a character who had that primal push-pull masculinity with a very protective, secure, and trustworthy quality. And that creates just as much of a fantasy as the girl that's always desirous and coming and ready for sex. Both of these are illusions that, whether you're yin or yang, you want to believe in. And the reason why this is important is that I love erotica, and I know men that love porn, and I love certain elements of porn depending. But what I had always thought about erotica is I love that this is making me create the experience in my head as opposed to seeing it visually. And so I've always liked being able to fantasize, and I've also liked having a space to see erotic situations in scenes that can be maybe dark and taboo, but I'm in the safety of experiencing it vicariously through a character and through the unfolding of a story. And that's great. But what I've noticed is that unconsciously what these erotic stories that I particularly love have done is that they have let me secretly want certain type of man that is very much a fantasy man. And knock on wood, there might be men that are like this, but I think they're not in their 30s. I think they've had to have a lot of work and self-awareness that usually doesn't come until a man is in his 40s and 50s. But the thing that they create is this character, this dominant man who maybe, in the ones I like, he's often a kidnapper or a captor, and he takes a captive. And then, so it starts with an antagonistic vibe. They're battling, and then eventually the woman comes to surrender and comes to realize that while she's in this situation that started off as a captor, that she really loves this guy because he ultimately has her best interests at heart, even though he kidnapped her. I call it Stockholm Syndrome erotica, because it's always that level of of that arc, that Beauty and the Beast arc. And so the harm of this is attributing these fantasy character traits on a real life man. So if you meet a real life man that wants to explore this kind of play, this kind of submissive domination type of stuff, you're going to have to be more keen on not giving them the benefit of the doubt as though they're one of these characters, as though they're somebody that has that protective, trustworthy quality with the primal beast. You're going to have to do more work into seeing, okay, this might be a person who has issues with power and control that they really need to act out sexually, but that might come out in very sadistic ways that are ultimately not going to have my best interests at heart. Whether that plays out emotionally with kind of emotional games where they are never able to have a conversation that and actually just own up to what their dark side. So if you meet a dominant who can own up to, hey, I've got this sadistic side, I've got this power hungry side, and I've got a need for control, and I'm aware of that, and I'm aware of when it gets into the unhealthy side, and I'm aware of how I can express it in this sexual scenario in a way that can help me get in touch with it instead of kind of keeping it in shame and shadow, right? That's a sign of a healthy dom. But if you got a dom who is excited to enact this role but is not aware of their own propensity to be toxic, for instance, sometimes in a person who's dominant, they're never going to think that your point of view matters because they're the master, they're the dom. They're going to think that you need to just come on board with their point of view, and they have no interest and curiosity in yours. So what that tells you is they're lacking empathy, and what that tells you is that they're not actually a healthy person to explore this with, because they're not seeing you as a human that is worthy of curiosity. They're seeing you more as an object. And unfortunately, these novels are usually written by women, these erotic novels, who are imagining their ideal. And their ideal is going to be both the bad boy and the good boy, so that you have that unpredictability and surprise and that novelty combined with that protective stability. But the truth is that a lot of people that are wanting to play these power games and want control are going to have a lot of issues with your point of view in terms of when you get into an argument. They're not going to be able to see your point of view as well because they want to have all of the power and control, and they just want you to jump onto their side. And another thing is they might also not be able to see the bad in them, and so they're going to think that if you don't go along, you're just a bad sub, or you're like somebody who is threatening their control, kind of like they might even say you're not feminine enough, you're not surrendering, you're resistant. And what that does is you're taking a lot of the kind of situations from those books and you're hearing them say that, and you're thinking, oh no, I'm not really, I might be too in my masculine, I might not be able to be in this dynamic right. No, that is a form of gaslighting and manipulation, because in order to do these kinds of scenes, there has to be a mutual trust and a mutual empathy. There cannot be this kind of person that thinks you will prove yourself to me as an object worthy of being a sexual object to me. No, it is of utmost importance, of more importance than even a basic vanilla relationship, to establish this mutual trust, this mutual comfort, and this knowing you're on the same page and respecting people's boundaries. That's why they have, usually you write out your limits and safe words, and that is all part of it. And it's important to emphasize this because I think that there's probably a high percentage of dark triad types of people who really love the idea of having no responsibility and all the control and power in this dynamic, and then kind of using the nature of that person that wants to be the sub. They could actually manipulate you against yourself by making you think that, oh, you're not surrendering to this experience, or you're not in your feminine, you're in your masculine. Those are all ways of actual control that are not respecting your actual personhood and establishing that trust. And so while I think there's plenty of people that are communicative in this world and that are actually really great people to explore that with, I think it's worth noting that there are probably a lot of abusive people who are using this as a playground. And so people who are on dating apps in general, I think it's way easier to have a lot more of kind of narcissist, psychopath, dark triad traits, because they can create an image of what they are, and there's no really way to check as well as if you meet somebody maybe through work or through a friend, or you have ways of kind of their credibility and background being checked by other people who know them. And so these kinds of personalities are going to be all over, I would assume, the kind of BDSM types of maybe focused apps. And so I'm just wanting to make this an important point, because I've often emphasized how great erotica is, but erotica has a double-edged sword to it, where it may expose you to your own dark side and your fantasies, but you've also got to realize it creates this idealized man fantasy that may be how you subliminally are seeing a lot of men in the world who are trying to be doms. And you've got to realize, okay, this could be a toxic dom that is manipulating me even through the use of kind of language in the polarity community, language in the BDSM community. And so it's important to think about that. It's important to not assume, of course, that everyone's evil and out to get you, because that also doesn't prove a good self-fulfilled prophecy. You don't want that to play out. But you also don't want to assume that people have your best interest at heart until they've proven it. You want to give the benefit of the doubt, but definitely give it in stages. Let them earn your trust, and let you also are proving yourself to them. But in a dom sub thing, it's not just you proving themselves to them, it's both parties proving the trust. If they're already trying to push this level of you prove to me I'm on the pedestal and you bow down to me, that's a huge red flag, and I think it's important to acknowledge, because these are all great, tools for a fantasy, but make sure you're not still in fantasy land when you come to reality of people who are unconscious and not owning their shadow.